Welcome back to our retreat with Pere Jacques. It's the third week of Lent, and today we're going to be talking about Christ crucified, the wisdom of God and the power of God. Most of us live our life from start to finish, but the truly great ones of our faith live their life from finish to start. That is, they keep their eyes on their ultimate goal, the life of union with God in the Trinity, and they let that inform their everyday life now. In this way, they're like Jesus. Jesus also lived his life from finish to start. Fulton Sheen says that the cross casts its shadow backwards on Christ's life, so that from his birth in Bethlehem in the stable, all the way to the hour of Calvary, he lived his life towards that final hour of redemption, when he would die on the cross and take us with him to heaven with the Father. And Pere Jacques also lived this way. There's a quote from The Living Flame of Love by St. John of the Cross that was very dear to Pere Jacques and influenced his life quite a bit. In The Living Flame of Love, John of the Cross writes, "Tear through the veil of this sweet encounter." He's talking about the final hour of this life, when the veil of this life will pass away and we will enter into eternal life and behold the God who loves us face to face. And that encounter will make us supremely joyful. The retreat text for this week includes a large quote from a meditation on Pere Jacques on the topic of suffering. In this retreat, he insisted over and over again that God made us to be happy. His will is that we should be happy and possess the totality of happiness. So Christ shows us that the way to be happy is not to avoid suffering, but to move through it and transform it at its roots into a source of happiness. And Pere Jacques also did this. He didn't flee from suffering, but he embraced it as part of the Christian life and transformed it into an act of love. And in that way, he was able to be deeply at peace, even in the midst of the most horrible human sufferings. So much so that his fellow prisoners who survived the camp testified to his deep peace and the joy that he brought with him, so that they all liked to be around him because it gave them peace and brought them hope. So when Jesus and his minister, Pere Jacques, invite us from their own experience to embark on this path of suffering as a path to happiness, we ourselves might react like the Jews and the Greeks in today's second reading. St. Paul proclaims Christ crucified, and when he does so, he says that the Greeks reject this proclamation and demand wisdom. And we can be like these Greeks by demanding wisdom. Suffering makes it hard for us to see, and we demand why. It makes it hard for us to understand why we're suffering. Or we might be like the Jews, and when we suffer, we demand a sign, some sign of God's presence, some sign of his something to reassure us. But to us, St. Paul proclaims, as he did to the Jews and the Greeks, that Christ crucified is the power of God and the wisdom of God. That is, we can only discover this divine wisdom, this joy of suffering with Christ, if we enter into that suffering with faith, hope, and love. And because suffering makes it hard for us to see, hard for us to understand why or to feel reassurance, it is very effective in purifying and eliciting from us a deeper faith, hope, and love. This is the example that Pere Jacques gives us. In the concentration camp in Mauthausen, he used to encourage the men by saying, "Do not doubt. As true as we are here, Christ is in our midst." So suffering elicits from us greater faith, hope, and love. And it's precisely faith, hope, and love that unite us to God. In fact, when faith, hope, and love increase, they are what allow us to live dimly here on earth what we will live for all eternity, that purpose that we have of entering into the life of God and being known by God and loving God. And this is why redemptive suffering is so fruitful, because it calls forth and elicits from us a very pure love. St. John of the Cross says in a quote that was very dear to Pere Jacques, that a little of this pure love does more good for the church than all exterior works put together. So entering into suffering with faith, hope, and love is the way to transform suffering into happiness and make it fruitful for others. And this means that we must pray, because prayer is nothing else but an exercise in faith, hope, and love. And so whenever we suffer, it's an invitation to enter more deeply into prayer and to rely on prayer to help us to grow in faith, hope, and love. This was the pattern of Pere Jacques. Every time in his life when he experienced a time of difficulty, he intensified his prayer life and he turned ever more to God in prayer. When he first tried to enter the seminary, his parents and his family opposed him. And so he turned ever more to prayer, and eventually a way opened up where he was able to enter seminary. Or when he was a seminarian and he was recruited into the French military, when he showed up at the camp, his whole company was making fun of him for being a seminarian, and he turned ever more to prayer, and eventually he won their respect and admiration. Or when he was 2.5 years into his priesthood, he contracted typhoid fever and he almost died from it. But this experience drew him even more to prayer, and it was in that prayer during that time of illness that he felt the call to enter the Carmelite order. And then when he was in the concentration camp at Mauthausen, when he first arrived, he entered into a very dark night of faith. First, he was put into quarantine for 2 weeks and treated very harshly. And then after that, for another 2 weeks, he was amid prisoners whose language he could not speak. And so he is living among this sea of excessive human suffering, but he could do nothing to relieve it. And it broke his priestly heart. And so he started to call out to Therese, to whom he was very devoted, and who he knew lived the last years of her life in a terrible night of faith. And very soon Saint Therese answered his prayers. He providentially met a leader in a network of French-speaking prisoners at the camp, and it opened a way for him to a very effective pastoral ministry in the camp, hearing confessions, caring for the sick, giving his food for those who were hungry, spiritual direction, and even celebrating clandestine masses. And so let us follow this example and make this our pattern in life, that whenever we encounter difficulty in our lives, we turn ever more to prayer. And through that prayer, we enter into that suffering with faith, hope, and love. And when our faith, hope, and love are purified by that suffering, and we're united with God, let us make out of our suffering a gift of ourselves to God and to the Church to do good for souls.